the difference was that perspective of meaning. If there's something that you feel that you are good for, rather than always asking what is good enough for me, what do I get out of life, he turned it around and he said, maybe we are the ones who are being questioned by life.
Unlock possibilities by changing your mindset. You will expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world. You're moving into a land of both blind spots and learning, of things and ideas. You just crossed over into the mindset zone. Join your guide, Anna Melikian, founder of Solo Biz Academy, the director of education for Book Yourself Solid, and a Ph.D. in psychology.
The show you are about to listen is backed by popular demand from the Mindset Zone archive vault. To get all new episodes, make sure you subscribe via your favorite podcast app and visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find the episode archive, show notes, and other amazing resources, including how to 4 times your success so you can work smarter, not harder, and learn how to leverage your talents to make a bigger impact while enjoying the process. All at mindset.zone. Hi, Anna Melikian here, and in this episode, I'm so thrilled for the opportunity to speak with Viktor Frankl's grandson, Alexander Vesely. Alex is an Austrian-born filmmaker and trained psychotherapist, and he has a beautiful movie called Viktor I. That is really an impactful documentary about his grandfather, Viktor Frankl. It took him about 3 years to do this movie, where he traveled the world to bring us this insightful look on Frankl's life through the eyes of those more close to him, from family members to colleagues to people that work with him, people that the work and life of Viktor Frankl really touched their lives. Now Alex lives in LA, California, and it's my pleasure to bring him to this Mindset Zone podcast. Very special for our USA listeners. I'm going to be giving away a copy of the DVD of this documentary, Viktor I. And if you want to enter to win the copy of Viktor I movie, you just have to text to Mindset Zone 34 to 33444. So the text is a text message, Mindset Zone 34, the number 34, so the number of the episode, and you have to text this message, everything together, to 33444. And because you are a listener of this podcast, you also can get the free audiobook download and 30-day free trial of audible.com. Just go to mindset.zone/audiobooks and you can get that. And one of the books that you can get in the audio format is Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl, of course. So let's go now to the interview. So it's truly a pleasure to have you here in this My Mindset Zone podcast, because I already did about 2 episodes that were around or about your grandfather, Viktor Frankl, on some of the things that I'm inspired about his work. So I was going over in Facebook, and I saw you in Facebook, and I remember of conversations that we have previously in the Milton Erickson conferences, and I said, I have to bring him to to interview him here and speak a little bit about you, about your grandfather and about the beautiful movie that you did about his life and work. And I think my first question is because for a generation, and this is my generation and previous generations, we know who Viktor Frankl was. We read some of his books. We still have very present how the Second World War and all the things that happened afterwards, and the new restart that many people had. But the new generation, this is really old stories. How they say they don't know much about, and possibly if you in a group of young people we ask who is Viktor Frankl, probably very few people will know about him. So how will you speak or introduce the life and work of Viktor Frankl to this new generation?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And that's a very good question, actually. And I'm not sure that I'm not often confronted with the problem of bringing it, because there seems to be a renewed interest in my grandfather's work. And so it's usually people approaching me and asking me about the experience and about my grandfather, so which I find really interesting, because he's been gone for almost 20 years now. And but the question of why is it that this work that he did has something to do and something to offer for the young generation, which it did, and it did so from the very beginning. He was the founder of the Austrian youth counseling centers in the 1920s, and how does that tie in with his work? He was always the one asking the question, does life have a meaning or not? And he thought that many times when you see suicide happening, that is almost always an answer of no to the question, does my life have a meaning or not? Mm-hmm. So that ties very in deeply with this central theme of logotherapy, as he called his own work. Logos from the Greek word meaning or word, and therapy, healing. So logotherapy is really healing through meaning. And his idea was that it is not only a good thing to ask, does my life have a meaning or not? It is a very important thing, and it is a sign of matureness if a person asks this question, does my life have a meaning or not? And when do we usually do that? When do you see people do that? The first time in their lives, that's when they become adults and go face those existential questions. What am I here for? What am I going to do with my life?
Yeah, and that totally relates with the new generation and the transition from, like you say, from the teenager years that are is much more who I am, and then suddenly they realize I'm in the world. What should I be doing here? Exactly. And what you're speaking really reminds me of many of the small videos that we still can find in YouTube, thanks to YouTube, of many of his lectures and conferences. And he loved to speak in colleges, and to the new generation was, I think, one of his things, speaking about this message of the meaning that we can find, and how this is so important to the young generation, to college students, and so forth.
Exactly. He actually once said, in one of his writings, that it's the new generation. It's actually a prerogative of that new generation and of the young generation to question the traditions and meanings that have been handed down by the previous one. Mm-hmm. They have to do it, and it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And the problem is not to ask this question. Sigmund Freud said, if a person asks the question, does my life have a meaning or not, then that is a symptom of a neurosis. That person needs to have therapy. And so here comes my grandfather and said, no, that's the reverse. It's not only not sick, but it's very healthy. Okay. And it only becomes a problem if you don't find an answer.
Yes. Totally. If there is no meaning there.
Exactly.
And that reminds me, and I can put this in the show notes for this episode. I will put the link to your movie, of course. And you have this in your movie, Viktor and I. And there is also, but I will put the direct link to this video in YouTube that I think was a lecture that your grandfather, Frankl, did in Toronto in the beginning of the 70s.
Yes.
That is using the blackboard and explaining, because it was amazing. He was about 70-something when he started flying lessons.
I think 66, yeah.
66, and then he was explaining what he had learned from his flying instructor. Yep. I love that metaphor. So he was explaining, and for people that don't know, yes, that we're going from point A to point B. We cannot add to point B. We have to add above point B because of that crosswinds. Because if we add to point B, we are going to go below point B. So it's so beautiful. And then he uses that as a metaphor that when we are dealing with people, we have to make them and suppose that they can achieve things more than we think is possible, allows them to arrive to their own potential.
Take a person as they can be, not as they are, to help them become who they truly are.
I think that is so powerful and so important message to everybody. And for somebody that is looking for meaning, I think that really resonates with them. But still going back to the question of I was thinking myself when you are answering, and to my own question, that the new generation maybe doesn't have so present the Second World War, but unfortunately the world reality keep remind us that atrocities and so horrible things can happen now. It's happening nowadays in this world. So I think the war zones and people, and there is always stories that of survival that we are amazed, and mainly with when I see these news and sometimes reports of how people are so resilient, it still amazes me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And Viktor Frankl was a top example of resilience, and how a person that went through what he went, and if somebody that is listening to this show, you don't know about Viktor Frankl and you want to know a little bit more about what we are speaking, I really recommend this classic book, Man Searching for Meaning, that you really have a inside view of what was living in a concentration camp in the Second World War and surviving it. But for me, the more amazing thing is not that he survived the concentration camp. For me, the more amazing thing is that he survived all what he lived there and had one of the more positive attitudes, an optimist person and believing of that people in their core were good, that I can find is really incredible. What is your interpretation of that, or your feelings about that?
I think that's a very good point. His story far extends the topic of the Holocaust, and this was just the kind of suffering that he had to face in his life. But he knew that his message was universal, and that suffering comes in many forms. And what he proposed was how to deal with that suffering. And one of the things he said was despair is suffering without meaning. He put it down like a formula. D is S minus M, like a mathematical formula. If you add the dimension of my suffering has some meaning, might have some meaning, then it's easier to bear the suffering. And this shows you that he was really, by the way, he wrote a lot more books than just Man's Search for Meaning, but it just happened to be the book that he's known for, although it's kind of the most personal. Well, maybe that's why, because it's the most personal. And there's just a small chapter about logotherapy in it, in the back. And he developed these theories before he actually went into the concentration camp. But there he could see he could test, if you like,
Yeah.
if it was actually true, that people become more, as you said, the word resilience, which is so popular now in psychology, the resilience, the ability to be to bounce back and to shoulder and to withstand such difficult times as the situation in a concentration camp or any kind of suffering. And that it's of survival value if a person has the perspective of a meaning, of a purpose, and that can be in the things to do, the work that someone wants to do. So oftentimes people say, I have to survive this because I need to do this and that. Mm-hmm. By the way, his own story, because he had to throw his manuscript away upon entering the concentration camp, and one day he was reconstructing it to keep himself awake and alive at night. So he felt this in his own experience, that I still have something to do, and it can be in the form of other people that you, and that means loving another person, to be directed towards that. I still want to meet that person. I want to be there for that person. That has a strong, high meaning. And but there's a third option. If there's nothing that you can do and there's no one around, and my grandfather himself, he would, after the war, return to Vienna and see that no one of the people that he loved were still alive. But even then, there's one last chance to find meaning in a situation, and that is by the attitude that you adopt, the stand that you take towards your own situation. And usually it's a situation of suffering. But not only, this also counts for good things, of course. How do you deal? What's your attitude towards the good things that you're experiencing in your life? But it almost always comes forth when people are confronted with suffering, and that's why the message in his work, I think, really stands the test of time, and has been relevant from the day on that he put it in his writings, and it still is today.
Right, and I totally agree. Let's go back to that. You said V equals S minus M. Go a little bit slower and explain that, because I think it's quite interesting.
Yes. Well, yes, it's really, he discovered what is the difference in people who are able to be resilient, to bounce back, even though when you look at their lives, there are a lot of tragedies, there are a lot of hard times, and yet they seem to be fine, and they seem to be psychologically fine, and feel good, enjoy life, just like he did. And you said yourself, you're surprised. How could he remain so positive? He should have been a broken, bitter man after what happened. Yet he had this resilience himself. And what is the difference for other people? If you look at other lives, they are relatively easy if you compare them, and yet they are very miserable, and the smallest things seem to be have a negative impact. And he found that the difference was that perspective of meaning. If there's something that you feel that you are good for, rather than always asking what is good enough for me, what do I get out of life, he turned it around and he said, maybe we are the ones who are being questioned by life. And what are you good for? How do you respond to the situations that you and the opportunities that you're given in life, and what do you make out of that? And if it's a meaningful thing, he found that this fulfills people in a way, on a very deep level, and makes them more resilient and able to withstand any kind of hardship. And that's true for situations in like a concentration camp or a psychological illness, or any kind of stress related to the whole idea of if a person has a lot of stress, this person will break, and if a person has little stress, it's not that simple.
So
right?
In some way, if the meaning is bigger than the suffering, for how horrible the suffering can be, the meaning can be even stronger.
Exactly, and some people, they will thrive when the pressure is on. They will even enjoy it more when the pressure is on and when they have a lot to do. And other people, they don't. And the difference is, does my work, does what I do, does the direction that I give and I adopt in my life have a meaning or not?
Wow. And this is the core of logotherapy, correct?
Yes. It's one of the main columns, if you like. So this idea of that there is a meaning of life, that is something you can only believe in or not. It's not something you can. It's kind of something you have to adopt as a logotherapist. That there is something like meaning in life. And it was Nietzsche who once said, thirst is the best proof that there must exist something like water.
Yeah.
So if there's no meaning in this world, why are we all so longing for it?
And I think one of the things that is incredible, like we were speaking about resilience, bouncing back, the importance of, it's not, yes, the life situations is, they can be so strong and they can be so impactful, but the interpretation, how we live, what we do with it is even more important. That is incredible, because now with the movement of positive psychology, it's part of what they are studying, is part of that. Now there are so much research about. And in some ways, like it's being a scientific validation of many of the concepts that Viktor Frankl spoke like 50 or 60 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes they don't, I think positive psychology, that is a movement that I really think is very important and try to follow, but I think they should recognize the origins, that there were people previously that already were exploring this in a very important way. That
the pioneers.
The pioneers, totally.
Like Milton Erickson, for example.
Oh, yes. They really prepared the field, and we still can learn a lot from their lives and work.
I think so too, yeah.
And the great thing about this is because we say logotherapy, and there is the word therapy and associated with it, and I think it has to do a lot with the time that this was developed in psychology and psychiatry. Everything was thinking around even the existentialists and the humanists, but there was still the framework, therapy, treating people. But I think the power of this method and others methods inspire for this search for meaning goes beyond helping people that have, let's say, psychological problem. I think everybody in our journey of personal development, we could use this inspiration of and these methodologies to help us to go further. What is your opinion about this?
Very good. That you're absolutely right, and that's why people always had a problem. Where to put my grandfather and his work. It doesn't really fit in any of the boxes that were available, and I think now it's one of the reasons is that he really transcended this, just being a psychotherapy, because yes, as you said, the question of meaning, that's something we're all asking ourselves, sometimes more conscious than other times. A lot of times it's just something that's kind of burning under the surface. He often said, when he was asked, what do you think about the success of your book, Man's Search for Meaning? And so many people are buying it. And he said, I don't see so much an achievement on my part as an author, but I rather see it as a symptom of the mass neurosis of today. If so many people reach for a book that promises to deal with the question of meaning, that is a symptom, because it means that so many people are dealing with the question, that it's a hot issue, really. And so I think, yes, and there's a lot we can do.
And I will argue with the word there, symptom, and because it's like you said, the metaphor of the Nietzsche that say, if we have thirst, means that there is water. If we have this longing for meaning, means that there is meaning out there. But nobody will say that thirst is a symptom.
Right.
So I think it's it's in the core of who we are as human beings that we have this longing for meaning.
My grandfather is perhaps the last of the founders of a really, complete school of psychotherapy in the old tradition of the founding fathers of a psychotherapy. And he's from Vienna. He still met Sigmund Freud. That was his first influence. And then he worked with Alfred Adler. He was the youngest in the group around Adler. They would meet every Wednesday. They would sit in the coffee house and develop their ideas as it was happening in the time. And if you look at the core ideas of those two people, Freud had the pleasure principle. Mm-hmm. So the basic ideas was that as a healthy human being is striving for pleasure. And then his disciple, Alfred Adler, said, no, a healthy human being is basically striving for power. Mm-hmm. That can be in the form of money or influence. And along came my grandfather, and he said, wait a minute, I don't think it's pleasure or power, but it's really meaning. And only if a person doesn't find that meaning that really transcends your own self, something other than yourself, something bigger than yourself. And only if you don't find that, then you resort to the lower aims of this kind of self-fulfilling meanings, this ego drive, if you like, to at least if my life is meaningless, I want to have a lot of pleasure or a lot of power. Mm. But this is not the original intention. He termed the coin will for meaning. But the quality of this will is different from the quality of, say, a will to pleasure or a will to power, in that, as you say, it's not a symptom. It's not something that needs to be treated, but it is something that is really a positive thing and a good thing, that's striving for a meaning. And it's only becomes dangerous when when you're kind of following the other influences of what could motivate you in life. And oftentimes that the will to meaning is kind of buried.
Yeah. But if I have to choose between pleasure or longing for pleasure, longing power, or meaning, I think meaning is the best route.
It usually gives you, it usually makes people possible, it enables people to do things that they didn't think were possible. And I've seen this on a day-to-day basis, and it's really fascinating.
And one thing that is, for me, very curious about you is that, because like any kid, when you grow up, possibly you didn't have any idea of the influence of your grandfather, Viktor Frankl, in so many people. He was just your grandfather.
That's right.
So when did you start to realize that he was so influential in so many people's lives?
Well, I'd have to say that was really around the time when I made my first trip to one of the logotherapy-related conferences, and at that time it was in Toronto, and he was getting a little frail. He was he couldn't travel on the airplane anymore. And so he sent my sister and I as kind of
representatives,
envoys, right? I just read a text that he wrote, and I thought, going there, I thought I need to prepare. I need to at least read Man's Search for Meaning before I go there, meet these people who are so interested in my grandfather. And so I read it on the airplane on the way there, and I thought, wow, this really. And then there I could see that people who'd never met, because I knew him personally. I knew him as he was just a really, really interesting person to be around with, and funny and witty, and he had this positive energy that would just fill the room, and so now I saw that people who had never actually met him were so impacted by this book and by the work that he did, and that really started to get my wheels turning. And hey, that's really interesting. He really had something to say that went beyond just the the experiential impact that he had as a person.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 19.
19. So, whoa, was in the right moment.
A little late even, I would say.
And how did that experience and realizing Odyssey that the meaning of his work and for so many people and then possibly even for yourself, how did that shape who you are today?
Well, that's a question that's always difficult for me to answer because I don't have, I don't know how my life would have turned out if I had someone else as my grandfather. I think most of the impact was by his example, the kind of person I could witness. And I'm lucky enough to have witnessed him a long time. I was 23 when he passed away. And we were really a close family, so I had a lot of time that we would just be together. And one of the things that impressed me now looking back, I didn't even know at the time so much, but one of the things was the absolute respect that he had towards you as a human being and as a person who would have the freedom to find out their own meanings and values, so to speak. And he really that was not only in his books and how he treated clients, but that was also the way he treated everybody, including his family. Mm-hmm. And I just recently thought of one example, which was when we talked about religion, which he rarely talked about. It was a very private thing to him. And I had a discussion with him, and at some point I felt it necessary to tell him, I do believe in a higher, cause and that, and in God. And I was kind of surprised by his reaction, and he just looked up at me. He validated that. He said, "Well, I believe you that," and that's it.
What? Repeat again what he said.
I believe that.
I believe that. Yeah.
And I wondered, what this really meant, but he didn't elaborate on that. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I thought that was really one of those moments where he looked at me, he validated this comment by saying, I'm proud of you that you're dealing with these big questions, that this is something that you're thinking about, but I'm not going to say more about that because this is really something you need to figure out
for yourself. It's
your
story.
For myself. Exactly.
Yeah, it's your story. You have to write it.
Exactly.
So powerful. And I'm trying to weave in as many questions as I can that my listeners, they send me ahead of time when I told them via Facebook that I was going to interview you. And I already put one or two in the interview, but there is a couple of them that I would like to also ask. And one I think really is follow-up from this conversation, that there is a quote from Frankl: "The salvation of man is through love and in love." What was your experience of how he shared this with his family? I think you already said about that, but I would like to know a little bit more. How is this motto of true love or in love was also important in the family life?
Well, this was something he would not. He would write so beautifully and so precisely about love, and love being a phenomenon that you could not reduce. He was against this idea of reducing everything to as he said, the formula is always nothing but. Mm-hmm. Love is nothing but a drive or sublimated, pleasure drive or whatever. But that there are some human phenomena that you have to take at face value, if you like, and love will be one of them. It's more than the sum of its parts. Yeah. And he wouldn't talk about it, but I like the idea of that love has to do with the time that you make for people. And he was a very driven person, and his work was very, very central. Obviously, if you look at what he did, he was always very conscious of the conscious of the value of time not only for him, but time of others, that others would spend with him, and what would be the most meaningful thing to do with your time right now. So there again, you see the concept of meaning, which goes through from the big concept of a bigger meaning to what are we doing actually right now, and is this the best use of time? This was the only thing he was greedy about, was time. If he felt someone was wasting his time, he was out of the door before you could notice. But he spent the time, and sometimes he would just really put aside the work and said, now it's really time to play.
So you knew how to play. If it was family time, it was playtime with the grandkids, was playtime.
He would take that as serious as, when it was time to work, or somebody called and said, Dr. Frankl, I'm going to kill myself, which often happened. And then, just say, I'm sorry, but I have to take this call. And then, he would be on that call sometimes for hours. But he valued the time and the playtime, and he was funny, and he would take us to, my first memory of my life is Disneyland, believe it or not.
Wow.
I think he took that as an excuse because he enjoyed it himself. So he's like, let's take the kids.
Fantasy and let's playing. And the other side, if love is so important in our lives that it is, and I totally like this of not reducing it to something else. But the other side of the coin, or they say, for us to be in that enabled to be open for love, we have to be able, and this is another question that was sent in, that how does one surrender beyond a sense of judgment in order to practice forgiveness? Because in order to be open for love, in order to be able to love, we have to forgive. And this, I think, the question is very relevant for all the experience of the Holocaust, but any experience in our lives that we have to forgive people in order to be open to love. Can you speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, that's another great question. The one thing he would always talk about was meaning, and the other thing was responsibility. How do we respond to a situation? And he would often finish lectures in the U.S. by saying, you have all these ideas about liberty, and you have this statue of liberty even, and a lot of things that even if they're not the smartest choices, but it was say, okay, I have the freedom to do this. Yes, you do. But he said freedom is just one side of a bigger phenomenon whose other side is responsibility. And that's why I think you should supplement and complement your statue of liberty on your East Coast by a statue of responsibility on your West Coast. And people love that. And there's actually a group now that's trying to make that a reality. But what did he mean by responsibility? How do we respond? Again, if life asks you a question, how do you respond, and what does that say about you? And one of the things with responsibility comes inevitably the fact that you're going to make mistakes and that you're going to make the wrong choices. And then you have the responsibility for what you did. Yeah. And if you did it right, then it's called an achievement. But if you did it wrong, then you are guilty. And that's just the situation, that's the human condition, that this is a fact. And sooner or later, everybody's going to become guilty. And how do you deal with that? And can life still be meaningful in face of that heavy load of guilt? And I think that's where forgiveness comes in. And he was very clear about guilt is something very personal. You can only be guilty for something that you have done or that you have not done but should have done. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that can be transferred by what your parents have done or your grandparents have done, or this idea of if you are a part of a larger group, if you're born in Germany, does that make you responsible for the Holocaust? Of course not. It's ridiculous. And he experienced this, what he called collective guilt, this idea of collective guilt himself. And so he was among those people, and I've only heard that from everybody who was a Holocaust survivor, said you cannot blame a whole population, and even less a population of a descendant population of that group. And you have to be very careful with not making the same mistake of applying a collective guilt onto a larger group of people. Look at the responsibilities and the choices that people have made in a certain situation. Are they really responsible? Are they guilty? And if they are, then you have to address that, and then you can talk about forgiveness, and not last but not least, the forgiveness you practice towards yourself.
Yes.
Which is often, the biggest problem.
Yeah, because the self-guilt and the need of self-forgiveness is so important.
Right.
Whoa. And I think this is one of the things that you is one of really your strengths, is that the way that you because when you're speaking about this, I was thinking about of the movie Viktor I that you did, and how you managed to illustrate, how you managed to bring all these things forward in the movie through the interviewing other people there, through telling their stories, and how important this is. So I would like to leave here, if people listening to this interview, if this conversation is being interesting for you, I really invite you to go, and I will put this in the links, this link in the show notes, to see the movie Viktor and I, because it's really a beautiful piece of cinema. It's very well done, and I think you bring your training as a psychotherapist in your way that you do, and you interview in a way of going more deeper and connecting the dots in a beautiful way. And you produce there a beautiful documentary about your grandfather's life.
Oh, thank you.
That I really recommend for everybody to see, and maybe to be the starting point of knowing more about Viktor Frankl, or know a little bit to the ones that already know a lot about him, to know some of the personal side of the story too, and how we can use this as inspiration for our own lives and to keep in our journey of personal development. So do you have any last thoughts or any message that you like to leave for our listeners?
Oh, well, I think you wrapped it up beautifully, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed this interview, because you can always sense if somebody understands, and you do. Thank you.
I'm very grateful.
So am I. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really enjoy having this opportunity to speak about the work and life of Viktor Frankl with somebody that knew him in person in a very special role of his grandson, and that study afterwards his work and logotherapy, and did a beautiful movie about the Viktor Frankl life that I really recommend that you go and see, and you can get it in Amazon.com, and very special for the USA listeners, you can enter to win a copy of the DVD of Viktor and I. You just have to text Mindset Zone 34. So everything together, Mindset Zone 34, and the number is 33444. You can go to the show notes at mindset.zone/34, and there you can find the links to where you can buy this documentary. Also a video of Viktor Frankl, the one that I spoke during the interview, is a 4-minute video that is amazing and so powerful that already spoke. I had one episode that really was the inspiration for it. That is episode number 7. Searching for meaning, are you aiming high enough? And also join the Facebook group mindset.zone/Facebook. Grateful that you cross over into the mindset zone. Expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world. Thank you for listening. And remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com is .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources. As always, I'm so grateful that you have crossed over into the mindset zone. Expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world.